our opening remarks, I mentioned a number of people who've been involved from a staff perspective and a volunteer perspective to help us get this event off the ground today. But of course, all of that takes financial resources as well. And if it weren't for the efforts of the Scranton Area Foundation, we would not be here today. So at this point, I'd like you to meet Karen Clifford, who is here representing that organization and who's going to introduce our keynote speaker to you.
Thank you, Terry, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Scranton Area Foundation, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Peter Bardaglio, to be with us today. I'm going to do a little advertisement for the Scranton Area Foundation. The mission of the foundation is to enhance the quality of life for all people in Lackawanna County through the development of organized philanthropy. The foundation strives to carry out this mission by developing and managing permanent endowment funds, by awarding grants and support to enable the community to respond to emerging and changing needs and opportunities, by encouraging and educating donors and providing a flexible vehicle for individual donors, nonprofit organizations, and community at large. And last but not least, by mobilizing community leadership in response to issues. We are proud to be a convener today. Through the effort of the Scranton Area Foundation, we are pleased to present Dr. Bardaglio. Currently, Peter is a senior fellow at Second Nature, a Boston-based nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the principles of sustainability in higher education. He is also the co-author of Fully Sustainable: Hope and Opportunity for Higher Education in the Age of Climate Change. Besides sustainability, Peter has written extensively on race and gender in the 19th century South. Awarded the 1996 James Rowley Prize from the Organization of American Historians for the best book published in the history of race relations in the United States. He was the Jesse Ball DuPont Fellow at the National Humanitarian Center in 1999 to 2000, and has received grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the American Historical Association. Dr. Bardaglio served as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs from 2002 to 2007 at Ithaca College. He received his Ph.D. and Master's degrees from Stanford University. Please give Peter a warm Scranton welcome. His first time here in Scranton.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's still morning, isn't it? I want to thank the Scranton Area Foundation for its generosity in supporting this event today, and also just let you know what a privilege it is for me to be here today. I got a great tour of the campus yesterday, got a really good sense of its dynamism and all the great things that are going on here around rebooting the future. So I really appreciated people taking the time yesterday to share that experience with me. What I want to do this morning is to talk about sustainability in higher education and to take a look at it from a maybe somewhat different perspective than perhaps you've thought about it. I want to explore the notion of sustainability as a core strategic imperative. In other words, a new paradigm for managing institutions and providing leadership in helping the next generation prepare for the challenges of the 21st century. And the way I want to do this is to first explore the idea of sustainability itself just for a few minutes, and then turn to looking at the ways in which those ideas can play out in the academic setting in terms of teaching and learning. Not just the curriculum, but to think about it in more expansive terms. And then I also next want to then move on to taking a look at it in terms of public engagement, because too often we think about sustainability on campus as the sole responsibility that universities and colleges have, when in fact we have to think about the fact that we're part of the larger system, not only a biological ecosystem, but a social ecosystem as well. And then having done that, I want to really focus on this notion of sustainability as a core strategic imperative and the ways in which perhaps you could think about how to integrate sustainability into strategic thinking about the future of the University of Scranton. So that's where we're going today. And so fasten your seatbelts. So there are lots of different ways to think about the future. You know, this year we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and in many ways the Civil War was a battle over alternative futures. And it's something I'm certainly keenly aware of because of my recent, my past life as an historian of the South. But so if you think about this in terms of alternative futures, it really is something that deserves all of our attention. So here's one alternative future. You may have seen this logo around. This is about, you know, we're going to continue to be the kind of consumerist society that really puts materialism at the top of the list and continue to live in the kinds of unsustainable ways we are? Or are we going to think about the world in a different way? Are we going to think about the ways in which we need to not only put economic health as a high priority, but also the environment and society? And so this is the classic conception of sustainability, that we need to, when we think about the choices that we make and think about the ways in which we want to shape the future, that we take into account not just the economic health, but also the issues of environmental stewardship and social equity. And what we strive to do when we think about being sustainable is to make choices that fall into the area in the Venn diagram of the three overlapping areas. So that's the classic way. Now, Van Jones, I think, makes a really important argument about the alternative futures that we face too. You may have heard of him. He was involved in a recent controversy at the beginning of the Obama administration, but he's been around for years, and he's really, for me, one of the most inspiring thinkers out there. He talks about the importance of green for all. In other words, he emphasizes, as a lot of people don't, the social justice side of the sustainability equation. And what Van Jones says is we have three futures, three potential futures in front of us. And we've got to figure out which one we want and how to get there. He said, first of all, we have eco-apartheid. Eco-apartheid is really about the notion that the folks who have the money, who have the privilege, can put themselves behind gated walls and somehow figure out a way to avoid all the ecological consequences of the bad choices we're making. Then there's the more general notion of eco-apocalypse. That probably explains itself, but you know that we're heading off the cliff, ecologically speaking, and we need to do something about it. And what Van Jones says that I think is so important for those of us who, especially those of us who look like me, you know, white, middle class, middle-aged, male, we need to recognize what Jones says, which is that eco-apartheid is just a speed bump on the way to eco-apocalypse. In other words, we may think we can protect ourselves by putting ourselves behind walls, but all we're doing is putting off the inevitable. So the only real choice here, Van Jones says, is eco-equity, which is that we recognize the importance of making sure that we are all in this together and that we all need to collaborate on rebooting the future in a way that makes it possible for all of us and all of those who come after us to have available to them all the opportunities that comes with the promise of democracy. Another really favorite thinker of mine is Thomas Berry, who you may be more familiar with. He was a monk, tremendously profound philosopher, a theologian, and cultural historian. And what Thomas Berry says in a really wonderful book called The Great Work is that we aren't going to get this right in terms of moving forward into the future unless we recognize that the communion, that the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And to me, in some ways, this is the most profound understanding of sustainability that I've certainly encountered. It's a recognition, again, of the interconnectedness of all life. I mean, when he talks about the universe, he's not talking about rocks. Okay, he's talking about all of life in the universe. And to the extent that we're a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects, we need to recognize that we are all active agents in this process. And as I used to tell my students in history classes, we need to recognize the importance of being subjects in history rather than objects of history. And so to recognize that we're a communion of subjects is to recognize that all of life deserves our respect, that all of life has dignity, and that we are interconnected with it, and that if we do damage to any part of that web, we're doing damage to ourselves. Another way to think about sustainability, and this comes more from my part of the world, the Finger Lakes, but you know, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy framed, they didn't call it sustainability, but they did think in terms of this, every decision they made, the impact it would have on the future through the seventh generation. Not necessarily exactly how our financial corporate reports work, right? They're always looking at the next quarter. But Haudenosaunee said, look, let's really understand that we are part of this web of life, not just now, but for generations to come. And so any choice we make, any decision we make, we need to think about the impact of that for the long term. And what I like about this is, like the other definitions, it focuses attention on the future, but in particular it emphasizes this sense of connection between generations. And when you stop to think about the notion of democracy, democracy is not just about this generation. We don't often enough, I think, consider the fact that we need to think in terms of intergenerational equity. In other words, not only democracy for those of us who are here on this planet now, but democracy in terms of equal opportunity and the ability to be represented in significant choices for all of those who come after us. The other part of sustainability that I think is important to emphasize is that it's not just about being less bad. Okay? There are lots of decisions we can make in our lives right now that are about being less bad, and those are important decisions to make, but they're not necessarily they're necessary but not sufficient. They don't necessarily take us all the way down the road to sustainability. So sustainability and I think one of the things I don't like about the word actually is that it tends to emphasize, I think for a lot of people, the notion of being less bad. Let's just do what we need to be sustainable, as opposed to let's do what we need to do to be prosperous and to be healthy and to be able to really live the kind of rich life that this gift of our being on this planet is all about. So sustainability, for me, it's important that it goes beyond this notion of the negative impact that it has. So it's about being future friendly. And I use this term, I've been using this term for a while, and I don't know, just the other day I was like in a grocery store or something, and I saw somebody, it was Colgate Palmolive, it may have been a laundry detergent or something, but it said, you know, instead of saying organic or natural or whatever it is they use these days, it said future friendly on it, and I went, oops. Maybe I should stop using that term, but I really think it makes an important point that, you know, too often the decisions we make are about decisions that are rooted in the here and the now, rather than thinking about the need to be cognizant of the future. And the notion that sustainability is regenerative. It's not just less bad, it's about doing good. It's about giving back to the environment, to the society, to the economy in ways that leave the earth better than we found it. And this for me goes back to the notion of what I was always, the big takeaway for me from being a Boy Scout, which is, you know, we were always told, leave the campsite better than you found it. And I think that has really important implications for our time on this planet and the way that we should leave it. So I like to think about, you know, the importance of all of us, you know, as Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, making sure we leave the planet in better shape than we found it. And that really is, to me, the fullest meaning of sustainability. The other point I want to make about sustainability is that it's a process. It's not a product. So this notion that somehow we're not moving towards sustainability because we have parking lots, for example. Well, come on, give me a break. You know, this is a long journey we're on. We need to take it step by step. And as long as we're moving in the right direction, then we're moving towards sustainability. And that's really the key to this whole thing. So it's not some endpoint of 100%, yeah, we've done everything we need to do. It's about understanding that this is a journey, it's an experience, and it's a transformational process. So what are the implications then when you take these ideas and you think about sustainability in the context of the campus? What are the implications in particular for the planning process? Well, one of them, I think, is that if we're going to move towards sustainability, if we're going to engage in an authentic journey here, we need to engage the community both on campus and off campus as co-creators, not as customers. You know, one of the things I was always told as provost was, well, you have to get faculty buy-in. And I would sit there and I'd go, I don't want to get faculty buy-in. I want to get faculty to join with me towards creating a shared sense of purpose, to understand the importance of being a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects. If I'm looking for faculty buy-in, in essence, I'm treating them as customers, not as real authentic stakeholders in the process. The other part about sustainability in terms of planning, I think, is it makes clear that what we need to do here is operate with a different paradigm, a paradigm that's about collaborate and connect, not about command and control. And this phrase actually comes right out of Thomas Friedman's The Flat World book. And I think it's really important to recognize here that, you know, we are becoming increasingly horizontal in as a world, and that the old notion of vertical command and control is not going to help us build a more sustainable future. And again, this goes back to Barry's notion that we're a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects. The other important point here, I think, is that sustainability in terms of planning forces us to focus on life cycle analysis, not just the next fiscal quarter, not just the upfront costs. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, this building is going to cost us blah, blah, blah to build. It's another thing to say, gee, you know what, the operation and maintenance of the building are the most important, most expensive parts of the building. And if it costs us an extra 3%, 4% to build a building a certain way, and we can save 40 to 50% over time in terms of the operation and maintenance, then that's the best investment possible. And one of the things that really impressed me yesterday is, as Mark Murphy took me on a tour around the campus, was the extent to which, you know, you folks are already thinking about this. You know, the way in which the buildings are put together really emphasizes the importance of thinking about life cycle, not just the upfront costs. Lots of attention paid to, particularly, the issue of energy efficiency and making the upfront investments that will pay off in the long run. And then finally, I think, and this is a tough one, maybe the toughest for most higher ed institutions. I'm sure you don't have the problem of silos at University of Scranton, but you know, I've encountered this phenomenon on other campuses. And I think one of the things that sustainability necessitates and helps to foster is a move from campus as a collection of silos towards a more like a greenhouse, where there's cross-fertilization, where there is collaborative thinking, and where we nurture each other in building a more sustainable future. And I'm going to take that idea and explore it further when we talk about the teaching and learning dimension of sustainability. So here's the road ahead. I like this image for a couple of different reasons. One is that because it emphasizes the importance of dealing with climate change, of course. But also, I think, just in terms of the kinds of socioeconomic and environmental and truly spiritual issues we have to come to grips with in rethinking our place in the universe. That it says, you know what, this is a big, big challenge, and we've got to figure out a way to deal with it. And as Robert Frost says in one of his poems, there's no way out but through. So I like the idea that there's this little thing there, that you can, if you get up the courage to move forward, that you can actually move through the problem, through the challenge. So, okay, so it's time for a new direction. But which one? And again, I love this image because it really, I think, captures a lot of how how a lot of us feel right now. It's just so confusing. It's so complex. It really makes your head hurt when you think about how do we move forward towards a different future, a future that recognizes that all of us, all of life is a communion of subjects. Now, somebody spoiled this for me and said, that's probably photoshopped. But I just love the idea that somewhere, somehow, there might actually be a traffic sign that recognizes, the perils of driving that says, good luck. So here's what we're confronted with now in higher education. It's the proverbial perfect storm. We have skyrocketing expenses. All of you are aware of this, not just in your personal lives, but in terms of the university's budget, the pressures that are on it. Rising costs of insurance, rising costs of healthcare, and rising costs of energy. If any of you checked, yesterday, oil was at $107, $108 a barrel. Gasoline, at least in New York State, where we figure out a way to tax everything, is $4 a gallon. It may not be here. But these are costs that aren't going to go away now. We have to figure out how we're going to deal with this. The other issues have to do with budget cuts, especially for our state-funded universities. They're on the chopping block. Really a lot of pressure there. For a lot of folks in private institutions, a lot of institutions have not yet recovered the losses in their endowments. They're really struggling just to get back to square one, where they were before the recession. And across the board, serious declines in philanthropic giving as families and organizations are really under pressure in terms of their ability to give. And then, of course, we all know about the issue of the middle class and the extent to which families are under tremendous financial stress now. And we don't even talk about the poor anymore. It's all about, geez, we've got to save the middle class. That right away should give you some hint about how bad things are. That's really the primary focus of the conversation. This is a New Yorker cartoon. And it's just, I look at this and I go, yeah, I want my bubble back too. I mean, remember the good old days. And I guess the irony behind this cartoon is we probably will get our bubble back, and it's the old Chinese wisdom of be careful what you wish for, because we're probably going to go through this whole thing again, but with a different kind of bubble than we went through the last time. It just seems to be in the nature of our economy these days. But it was a bubble. It floated a lot of things that probably shouldn't have been floated, and then it popped, and it left a lot of us and a lot of institutions in really bad shape. So what's to be done? Well, certainly when you're faced with these kinds of tremendous challenges, wishful thinking is definitely not the answer. And what I would argue is that, in fact, the biggest risk is to take no risk at all. There's no, again, as Robert Frost says, there's no way out but through. So let's figure out what the most important risks are that are out there, and what are the ones that really make the most sense in terms of going forward. Okay, so let's turn to the academic side of things. When we talk about sustainability on campus, we usually talk about it in terms of three different dimensions. The teaching and learning and research being one of them, the other one being campus facilities and operations, and the third one being community outreach. I'm going to focus actually the most today on number one and number three. I think that campuses have made tremendous progress in terms of facilities and operations. You certainly are on the right path here. In many ways, it's the one that's gotten the most attention. The two legs of the stool that I think have not gotten the attention they deserve, have not really made the progress they need to make, are the ones involving teaching and learning and community outreach. So in terms of the academic dimension, I want to emphasize that being boldly sustainable, in other words, recognizing that sustainability is a core strategic imperative, is not just a curricular thing. If all we do is think about it in terms of overhauling the curriculum, then I think we've missed a really important point. And what's that point? Well, it's a point that Stephen Sterling makes in a really wonderful book called Sustainable Education. It's like 90 pages long. It's a great little book, and it's packed full of insights. And one of the most important insights that Sterling makes in this book is that there are three ways to think about education and sustainability. There's the first order, which he calls education about sustainability. That's where we deliver new content, sustainability content, but we deliver it in the old ways. We deliver it in the way that I'm doing now, standing in front of an audience, the sage on the stage. I'm opening up the top of your heads. I'm pouring all this valuable information in, and hopefully you'll take it and transform it into knowledge. And even if we're, and if we're all lucky enough, we'll all be able to take that knowledge and turn it into something approaching wisdom. Okay, that's the way it's supposed to work, and that's the conventional notion of teaching when it comes to non-sustainability content as well as sustainability content. So that's the first order. The second order is education for sustainability. What Sterling means by that is the notion that we can take sustainability content and move students towards transformation, towards an understanding that they are subjects in history, not just objects of history, and that they can take control of their future and help make changes in society, in the economy, in our relationship with the environment that will bring about a more sustainable future. But again, the content is delivered in the traditional way. The last one, the third order, is the one that Sterling says we really need to strive towards, and it's education as sustainability. It's about recognizing that we need to transform the ways in which we teach and learn, not just the content we deliver or what we hope the impact of that content will be. And so by that, Sterling means we need to become more student-centered. We need to engage students in their own learning. We need to help them learn how to learn, right? Which is really, when you think about it, it's the goal of all traditional liberal arts education. But it frames it in the context of sustainability. And we need to promote the ideal of the reflective practitioner. And I think it's one thing that schools like Scranton and Ithaca College, where I was previously, have in some ways the best opportunity to do. And what do I mean by that? Where we say to our students, you know what, you shouldn't have to choose between a professional education and a liberal arts education. What you should be able to do is get the best possible professional education within the context of liberal learning, or on the other hand, get a really outstanding liberal arts education, but be equipped with the tools and the skills that will allow you to have an impact as a professional in the rest of your life, in your career. Either way you approach that, it's the goal here is to become a reflective practitioner, to be able to answer to be able to ask the big questions that the liberal arts are all about, to know what the most important questions are. And again, not to necessarily be looking for easy answers, to be able to grapple with complexity and ambiguity and ambivalence. That's what the liberal arts are about. But on the other hand, to be able to, as practitioners, take that framework and make it work in a real world context with the skills and tools that come with being a professional. So that's part of what Sterling's driving at. The other piece of this is, I think for me especially, education of sustainability means giving students the opportunity for hands-on experiences, to connect learning within the classroom to learning outside the classroom, and as often as possible to make that learning project-based. In part, that's a recognition of the different learning styles of the millennium generation. It's about understanding that they have a different worldview than those of us who are baby boomers, and to understand that what really motivates students, and this is the research shows this across the board, is problem solving. And that if you give students the opportunity to solve problems within the context of learning, that's what will really get them on board and really drive them in ways that will promote deep learning not just memorization, but real skills around problem solving and creative thinking. So I just want to talk just briefly about how this played itself out at Ithaca College. Interesting from my perspective, when I arrived there, we had just gotten a National Science Foundation grant to promote collaboration between the Environmental Studies program at IC and Eco-Village at Ithaca, which was just off campus. The Eco-Village at Ithaca is a really interesting place. It's one of the top 6 eco-villages in the world. It's not a bunch of hippies living in tents, okay? I want to make that really clear. These are middle-class professionals. A lot of them are faculty at Cornell or IC, but who've said, let's figure out a way to maintain our quality of life at the same time we reduce our carbon footprint to as close to zero as possible, and emphasize the importance of community as we do this. So what we did was we partnered with Eco-Village at Ithaca through this 3-year grant, and then worked this into the operating budget of the college going forward, and said, you know, let's use Eco-Village at Ithaca as a living and learning laboratory. Let's take advantage of the fact that in many ways we have the future right here. You know, we can go up to Eco-Village at Ithaca. It's on, you know, Ithaca College is on West Hill, South Hill, I'm sorry. Cornell's on East Hill, and Eco-Village is on West Hill. Let's recognize that each one of these 3 hills in Ithaca is a community of learners, is a learning community. And let's take advantage of this West Hill experience and say, we can go up there, we can put our arms around the future and really reach out and touch it. It's tangible, you can see it, it's concrete. And so, partnering with Eco-Village at Ithaca, we developed these interdisciplinary courses on sustainability that were taught team taught with IC faculty and educators at Eco-Village at Ithaca. And that really helped launch the conversation within the academic realm in some very important ways. And then part of this was, again, being project-based. We gave the students opportunities to carry out projects that would have a real-world impact. So the students designed this bus stop on West Hill with passive solar heating and a green roof. The students designed a root cellar so that the farm that's at Eco-Village can be used during the winter to grow root vegetables that can then be stored on site. And you know, I actually went over to see the root cellar, and it was just, you know, there was just something so concrete about it, to be able to walk into this root cellar and see all this stuff hanging from the ceilings and go, you know, that's IC students did that. And in fact, then the students followed up with that the next round and developed a whole bunch of different recipes for using these root vegetables for, you know, looking at the issues of nutrition and well-being for the Eco-Village residents. So it really involved the whole cycle. And then, as part of all of this, and ongoing at the same time, we launched what we called the Finger Lakes Project. Part of the NSF grant and the ongoing funding from the college involves summer stipends. It's very similar to what you're doing here now, giving faculty these mini grants to work over the summer to think about courses they were already teaching or new courses they wanted to teach, and weaving sustainability into those courses. So really focusing on place-based study. How can we use where we live and where we work and where we study as a living laboratory? And giving students a kind of experiential learning that would allow them to connect learning inside the classroom with learning outside the classroom. And working with faculty teams that took a multidisciplinary approach. One of my favorite examples is Tom Pfaff, who's an IC math professor. You know, the first reaction that you always get from faculty is, how am I going to teach sustainability, you know, in a music class or in a math class? Well, instead of saying, how am I going to do this, Tom said, let's ask the question, how can I do this? Which has a completely different implication and emphasis. And what he did, and it turned out to have a really positive consequences in terms of the learning of students. He took energy and environmental data in his introductory calculus courses. And I don't know about you, but when I took introductory calculus, I was like, oh, please, give me a break. You know, just this, I don't understand any of this. But what Tom did was he used real-world data about energy and the environment, and he used it to teach his students about curve fitting and regression analysis using the data. And had the students at the end of the semester, their semester project was to write papers based on their mathematical analysis of this data about energy policy and making recommendations about how we should move forward. So yes, you can use sustainability to teach math. Another course I wanted to highlight is a course that was actually received the National Wildlife Federation Campus Ecology Award in 2006. Is a freshman seminar called Sustaining Our Worlds, and it's an interdisciplinary seminar. It's taught by faculty from sociology and business and biology. And just, again, they would focus for that semester on real-world problems. So, for example, one semester they said, let's look at paper and office supplies on campus and how they're used, and how can we move towards a more sustainable approach to this. And so they went out and they tested 100% post-consumer recycled paper. They experimented with different document settings, and they did surveys to explore attitudes about recycled office supplies. And all of this was actually enacted as a result of this course. So the campus moved to 100% recycled paper, and the campus, as default settings, went to two-sided printing. And it had a significant impact, not just on the environment, but on the financial health of the college. So let's turn to community outreach. The point of this is to recognize that being boldly sustainable, thinking about sustainability as a core strategic imperative, means that it's not just a campus thing, that we have an obligation to engage the larger public. Implicit in the notion of trying to become more sustainable as a campus is that we will demonstrate leadership by example. Well, if we're going to demonstrate leadership by example, then that means we need to reach out to the community in which we're situated. And we need to share our expertise with that community and be open to learning from the community about ways that we ourselves can become more sustainable on campus. And again, this is just a recognition of Barry's insight, you know, that we're a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects. That you can't draw a line around the borders of the campus and say, okay, we're carbon neutral, we've done our job. Well, that's the first step. But the second step is to then move into the community and say, you know, let's continue this conversation. Let's figure out how we can do this together. You know, and who knows, it may even help in those conversations that go on in every college town, every university town, about that thing called payment in lieu of taxes, right? You know, you're really doing something that has a really concrete impact on energy costs in the community. So one of the projects that I spend a lot of my time doing now is something that's called the Tompkins County Climate Protection Initiative. And I coordinate this. I'm fortunate to have underwriting from one of our local foundations to do this. And in this effort, we really try to emphasize the model of cross-sector collaboration. In other words, recognizing that we're all in this together and leveraging the kinds of climate action commitments that have been made by Cornell University, Ithaca College, and the local community college, Tompkins Cortland Community College, all three of which are signatories to the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. All three of those universities, their presidents have committed to moving their campuses toward climate neutrality, in other words, zero carbon footprint. And in doing so, they are demonstrating leadership by example to the larger community. At the same time, the mayor of the city of Ithaca was one of the original signatories to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which commits the city to pursuing the changes necessary to bring the carbon emissions within the city to the standards of the Kyoto Protocol. So given these public commitments that have been made, how can we leverage these into a community-wide, multi-sector collaboration? So the strategy here then is to establish and mobilize a coalition of these local community leaders who are committed to these three things: the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, to a transition to clean energy, and in some ways, most importantly, to improving energy efficiency throughout the community, both in residential sector as well as the commercial sector and the government sector and nonprofit sector. So here's the makeup of the coalition. At the center are really these three organizations, institutions that provide the collaborative support. Sustainable Tompkins, which is a coalition in the community that's been around for about 8 years now, that is grappling with the overall issue of sustainability, not just climate protection. The Park Foundation, which is the foundation that underwrites this effort and has been a major supporter in the community of sustainability efforts. And then Second Nature, where I'm a senior fellow, they act as the fiscal agent for Tompkins County Climate Protection Initiative and help promote this example of multi-sector collaboration nationally. And then around that center, that collaborative support, we've organized into 4 different sectors. The education sector, and all of these are folks who come to the table every month for these meetings. So we have Cornell University there, we have Ithaca College, we have the local community college, Tompkins County Cooperative Extension, which is a very big deal in Tompkins County. That's operated by Cornell. And we have the Ithaca City School District involved in these conversations as well. Then there's the government. We have the president of the Tompkins County Legislature comes to these meetings every month. The county planning commissioner comes to the table every month with with at least one, if not 2 of his senior folks. The city of Ithaca is at the table. The town of Ithaca surrounds the city of Ithaca. There's this crazy thing we do in New York with jurisdictions. We love to make it as complicated as possible. And then the Ithaca Tompkins Airport, which is owned by the county, is the first airport in the United States to develop a plan funded by the Federal Aviation Authority for greening the airport. And then among the various nonprofits that are involved in this is the Cayuga Medical Center. The senior vice president for the hospital sits at the table for this. The associate vice president for facilities at the hospital sits at the table. Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, which provides lots of support for energy efficiency retrofits of low-income households, is at the table. The Museum of the Earth is at the table. The Science Center, the Children's Science Museum, is at the table, as well as Tompkins Community Action, another community group that really focuses on energy issues for low-income households. And then the fourth sector, business and finance. There we're represented by the local credit union, Abbott Lund Hansen, which is a energy services company that focuses on district energy, Holt Architects, which is one of the really significant green architects in architectural firms in central New York, Tompkins County Area Development, which is the economic development arm of Tompkins County, and then among other folks that are at the table, Tompkins County Landlord Association. What I want to emphasize here is that these are folks who are leaders in the community. This isn't just you know, a bunch of folks dancing around the maypole. It's not a group hug. This is about business leaders, government leaders, educational leaders, nonprofit leaders saying, as a community, we need to become more resilient. We need to become more energy independent. And this is about promoting economic health as well as environmental stewardship and social justice. And that if we make the right decisions going forward as a county, we will win the future. I don't know, we might have heard that phrase recently. that this is about, what Richard Florida says, it's about helping to promote the creative class, to attract young people to the region who will stay here and not just leave, who understand that this is a community that is future friendly and that people can come here and make a difference. So the purpose of this then is to facilitate implementation of a strategy, a target, and a timetable for making significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And as part of the conversation of this group, the Tompkins County Planning Commissioner proposed a goal of 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the county by 2050. That goal has now been approved by the Tompkins County Legislature. The interim goal is 20% reduction by 2020. So that's a real thing. That's the commitment that everybody at the table has said, yes, let's do that. And so how do we do that? Well, primarily by creating a peer-to-peer mentoring network. We know this from the research on students, that the most effective way for students to learn is peer-to-peer mentoring. So what makes us think that won't work in the real world off campus? So we really emphasize this approach and emphasize the importance of mutual support, and as a goal of not only learning together, but then incubating new projects. And and that was the scariest part for me. How do we know this is actually going to work? I mean, this was something I just, I wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweat and go, what if we only end up just sitting around the table talking? Last thing we need in Ithaca is another place where people come together to talk. We do that all the time in Ithaca. What about actually launching a project or projects that will have a concrete impact? And so we began to explore those possibilities through presentations, updates that we shared with each other, and discussion. And here's some of the projects that are now launched. We now have something called the Tompkins Energy Conservation Corps. This project trains Cornell and IC students to carry out informational energy assessments of homes. We focus on community leaders, folks, informal and formal leaders in the county who can make a difference in shaping the conversation around town. So to this point, we've trained roughly 54 students who've then gone into the homes of over 120 community leaders and engaged in energy assessments that allowed these folks to understand the impact, both economic and environmental, of relatively low-cost changes that they can make that will reduce their bills, create jobs, and reduce their carbon footprint. And that, I think, really made a difference in terms of the conversation in the community, and really began to facilitate the growth of energy efficiency retrofits. There's one little company in the community. It's called Snug Planet. It's a husband and wife operation. They don't even have an office. They operate out of their home. They now are responsible, according to the latest NYSERDA data, they are responsible now for 2.5% of all the energy efficiency retrofits that have taken place in the residential sector in the state of New York. Now, great news for Snug Planet. I'm not sure what it says about the rest of the state, but I think part of the reason why Snug Planet has had that kind of impact is because of these conversations that have really, it's viral marketing, word to word, word of mouth. Another big project that's been launched now is a feasibility study to look at the possibility of a shared biomass cogeneration heating and power plant that Cayuga Medical Center and the Museum of Earth, which is right next door, would launch together. And that could provide the basis, a spine for a district energy system for a development on West Hill that would be around pedestrian-oriented development, mixed use, more of a village-like environment rather than what's on the other side of the lake, which are, your classic suburban subdivisions with all the sprawl that implies. There's going to be a large employer summit. The large employers got together as a result of these conversations, formed their own separate caucus, and said, let's have a summit in June where we can share ideas about energy savings. This isn't just Cayuga Medical Center. It isn't just Ithaca College or Cornell University. It's major corporations that are in the community like Borg Warner that are coming together to say, you know what, if we talk with each other about how we can save energy, we can help each other. And then we've also received just recently, like last week, publicly announced an EPA Climate Showcase Community Grant, $375,000 over the next 3 years, to take the experience and the principles, the conclusions, the findings of Eco-Village at Ithaca and work with local village planning officials on how to help promote that same kind of smart growth at the village level and promote things like urban infill and more effective mass transit. And then finally, one of the efforts that I think has been the most fun for the folks that have been participating in it is a county-wide energy campaign to raise public awareness. Gotten a whole lot of people together, some of whom are already involved with TICP, some of whom aren't, to plan how to launch this in the fall to raise public awareness across the county around the importance of more effective energy use. So I hope at this point it's become clear about the ways in which being boldly sustainable, in other words, sustainability as a core strategic imperative, is not just a green thing, but rather it needs to be a core strategic imperative for planning the future, for ensuring for the community that we have a healthy economy, that we do promote social equity, and that we take seriously our responsibility for environmental stewardship. So in that context, being boldly sustainable means that sustainability isn't just an add-on. It's not just something that's marginal to the real business of schools or communities. And it's not only the right thing to do, but it's a smart thing. It makes sense in all three of those dimensions, economic, social, and environmental, to think about sustainability as the new paradigm for strategic management. I want to give you one example of an institution that's done this, I think, very effectively. It's Berea College. It's a small college. You may not have heard about it, but it's in central Kentucky. It was founded in 1855, and it was established, now think about this, 1855 in Kentucky, as the first coeducational and interracial college in the U.S. South. That in and of itself is a remarkable historical fact. It has 1,500 students. 64% of these first-year students come from families where neither parent has a college degree, and it's currently ranked 68th among national liberal arts colleges. Here's an institution that really understands what it means to be boldly sustainable. They have integrated and infused sustainability throughout every aspect of the institution. So not only have they infused sustainability across the curriculum, but they seek in every dimension ways to guide and support campus efforts to practice sustainability. The whole campus, 1,000 acres of farms and gardens, 8,000 acres of forests, including ponds and streams, all of that is used to promote student learning around sustainability. What about this? And that's clear how that connects to the environmental piece. But what about the environmental piece? And what about, I'm sorry, that's clear how that relates to the environmental piece, but what about the economic piece and the social justice piece? Well, they take very seriously their mission to give poor residents of the Appalachian region a college education. And they stopped and they said to themselves, which of these groups are we not really bringing it to the table that we really should be bringing to the table in the context of our mission. And it became readily apparent when they asked that question that it was single mothers with children. That was the group that had been most neglected. And they said, how can we solve that problem in the context of sustainability? And they created an eco-village right in the heart of campus. It's an ecologically designed living and learning community that provided housing for single mothers with children and established a daycare center of really first-rate quality and said, this is a place where our students can work with the children and study issues like child psychology, child development, sociology, etc. And so, to me, it's just a brilliant embodiment of understanding sustainability as a core strategic imperative. It obviously gives them a competitive edge. It allows them to increase their brand equity. They have a great story to tell, and it's a story very few other institutions can tell as well. For the more traditional age students, they've established a demonstration house where students live. That has reduced energy and water use by 75%, and where the residents recycle, reuse, and compost 50% of their waste. They have an ecological living machine in this residence hall that naturally treats sewage and wastewater on site so that they can reuse water at the same level of quality that it came in. And it's just a tremendous experiment for the students to see, if you think outside the box, and if you are innovative and creative, you can solve problems that can sometimes seem insurmountable. So Berea College is a signatory to the President's climate commitment. They've set as a target 65% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2015. They've engaged in $121 million of renovations to enhance their energy efficiency and sustainability. And they've switched their heating plant from coal to natural gas. Now, if you've been reading the New York Times lately, you're aware of the fact there's a lot of controversy now around, thanks to these two Cornell researchers, about the extent to which natural gas is cleaner than coal. Because now we're focusing on how much greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, is released in the extraction of natural gas. Yes, natural gas burns cleaner than coal, but when you look at the whole life cycle, maybe not. So this is the initial research. It's just out. It's peer-reviewed, but it's going to be subject to a lot of investigation, and it'll be interesting to see how that conversation goes. All of which, of course, emphasizes that there's no silver bullet, there's no easy solution. Everything we do is going to have a trade-off. So if you hung in there so far, especially if you're involved in administration here, you must be asking yourself, how can I afford to even think about sustainability given all the other financial pressures that I'm facing at my institution? And our answer in the book, Boldly Sustainable, is you can't afford not to. And we base that assertion on corporate data, which demonstrates clearly and persuasively that the value proposition is so huge that you can't afford to ignore it. That it provides organizations, whether you're corporate or nonprofit, with a really significant competitive advantage. And it plays itself out in the following ways. It focuses the organization on long-term strategy. It strengthens governance. This is about, understanding that stakeholders aren't just folks you get buy-in from, but that are co-creators. They're shared governance. It's a concept you might have heard of in higher education. Trustees are always worrying about risk management, administrators as well. It fosters sound risk management practices. It encourages systems thinking. And probably most importantly, I think in some ways, it generates a culture of innovation. You really get from the ground up, from the facilities management folks through the entire administrative hierarchy, an understanding that we're committed to creative problem solving here. We want your input. Help us think these problems through. And then also important in any organization is the fact that it promotes alignment with the institution, because it tells a story about the institution. It creates a shared sense of common purpose. here's where we are, here's where we want to go, and we're only going to get where we want to go if we do this together. I love this quote. It's from Kevin Moss, who's a well-known corporate sustainability strategist. And Moss says, sustainability can be a key organizational driver, not just when times are tough, but actually because they are tough. And that's really important. Really need to think about what this means. Sustainability can be a key organizational driver, not just when times are tough, which is what I've said up to this point, but actually because they are tough. That this is when we need most to embrace sustainability as a core strategic imperative. On what basis do I make that assertion? Well, there's a management consulting firm called A.T. Kearney. They're not exactly a left-wing socialist outfit, okay? These are corporate consultants who are in this for the bottom line. And they've looked at 16 out of 18 industries, and in those 16 out of 18 industries, it's the companies with a strong commitment to sustainability who, in their words, were the clear leaders in the financial markets. Those companies in those 16 industries outperformed the industry averages by 15%. And when? In the second half of 2008. Now, I know it's painful to remember, but the second half of 2008 was the bottom of the recession. It was where we are in the absolute worst shape possible. And I just think this underscores Kevin Moss's point. Additional data. This is from the Aberdeen Group in a report called The ROI of Sustainability Making the Business Case. This came out in 2009. They looked at the data, and what they saw was that sustainability initiatives cut costs in over 200 companies from 6 to 10%. Now just ask anybody who's involved in administration at the university, would you like to figure out a way to cut costs by 6 to 10%? And they're going to go, yeah, I'd settle for 3%. Tell me how. To say you can cut costs by 10% is huge. They cut their energy costs by 6% compared to an industry average of 4% increase. That's a delta of 10%. Again, that's huge. And at the same time, their customer retention rates, which is a huge issue, not just for corporations, right, but for universities and colleges in terms of their employees and students, retention rates. They increase their retention rates by 16%. Now walk down to the admissions office and say, hey guys, I think I just figured out a way to improve our student retention rate by 16%. Do you think that they would say, we don't have time for this? No, of course they wouldn't. They'd say, tell me how. And then one last set of data here. This comes from a more recent study from April 2010. They concluded that companies that lead in climate-related, there's other studies have been about sustainability, that lead in climate-related innovation also deliver the higher financial performance. They look at the top 350 corporations in terms of their commitment to climate adaptation and protection. They outperform the S&P 100 by up to 3.5%. And they do this by creating efficiencies in energy use, in business processes, and transportation. This is all real. This is all actual data of real corporations in real time. So just to wrap up, what does this mean in terms of the development of sustainability on campuses across the country? Well, this comes from a friend of mine, Dave Newport, who just gave this presentation in April. On most campuses, campus sustainability begins in terms of grassroots advocacy, and it's the students in particular who tend to push this on campuses. Almost all of the institutions that have signed the President's climate commitment have done so as a result of students pushing the administration to do so. At some point along the way, it begins to dawn on administrators that, you know, actually this is a way to save money. Now, to some extent, as I understand it here, it's actually the business cases come before a lot of grassroots advocacy. But generally speaking, this is how it develops. And so you have the folks who are responsible for managing resources at the university saying, you know what, maybe we're onto something here. So let's look at the business case. And then if you're going to take it to the next level, you need to have the visionary leadership that will help make that happen. And then the final stage, the most important stage, is integration. In other words, sustainability is not just a checklist. Let's do X, let's do Y, let's do Z. But it becomes a coherent, strategic plan. It becomes an imperative that helps organize the entire institution. So those are, and I'm going to just skip all this through, but there are ways of actually on campus doing this for yourselves. I'll share the PowerPoint. It lays the steps out very clearly. I've done this workshop on a number of different campuses. You can do it yourself. You don't need to hire anybody to come in and do this for you. It's a really easy way to think about how to integrate sustainability into your strategic thinking. The main conclusion here I want to leave you with is that campuses that embrace sustainability as a core strategic imperative and they embed it in their mission, which in many ways has already been done here, right? This is a Jesuit institution. The whole issue of social equity, social justice, community engagement, it's all part of what it means to be a Jesuit institution. But those institutions that embrace it and embed it in their mission, vision, and leadership, those are the institutions that are going to flourish in the 21st century. Those are the institutions that are going to have a competitive edge. Those are the institutions that are going to have a distinctive brand with compelling stories to tell not only students and parents and faculty, but also contributors to the institution. And with that, I want to leave you with one last thought, which is a great quote, I think, from Eric Hoffer, the sort of self-made philosopher and longshoreman. Eric Hoffer says, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And again, I think this emphasizes the importance of, as we move forward around sustainability, engage in that conversation, that we recognize that in the 21st century, we need to be a community of learners and not a community of the learned, and that we can help each other learn and grow and move into this future with real promise and hope and opportunity. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Peter. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. I think you've given us all quite a great deal to think about in terms of how we can integrate sustainability into our respective organizations. Out of respect for everyone's time, we are running a little bit behind. So what I'm going to do is direct everyone to the next set of concurrent panel sessions. We'll have 3 speakers, and following our panel sessions, we are going to go right into lunch. So thank you very much, and thank you again, Peter.
Thank you.